So Vivian is a good reminder for me. So with that intro, we'll now go into 459. If you're looking in the book, it's in the middle, section 4. If you're looking in the Kindle, I will pull it up. And again, we use the practical lessons of the Tanya. It's a green book. It's a very deep ideas that we're talking about in the spiritual worlds, where things are reaching through our divine light of the mitzvahs and our intention in the mitzvah. Hopefully that intro was helpful as we dig in. All right, here we go. I'll just make it a little bigger. So section 4 is at the bottom of the page. How the truly enlightened, which is referring to the tzaddik, how they worship God. So this little intro is also helpful. We have now established that a mitzvah rises to the sfirot of either Yetzirah or Bria, and from there it will pass upwards to the sefirot of Atzilut, and then merge with the blessed infinite light. So again, my mitzvah either reaches to the place of Yetzirah, one world, or Beria, another world, but from there it rises to Atzilut, which is directly connected with the divine light. So God's infinite light is the place of where my mitzvah ends up. That was one point. And number 2, souls rise through their worship to the chambers of either Yetzirah or Bria. So, and just to explain to you the difference, I know I gave somewhat of an intro of this, but just to make sure some people came a little later, so I just want to establish this theme that we were dividing between the person doing the mitzvah, the soul performing the mitzvah, and the mitzvah itself. The mitzvah itself has the potential to reach higher than the source of the person themselves through my mitzvah with the proper kavanah. And we explained there's 2 types of kavanah. Over here, we're talking about the deeper form of kavanah. It has the potential to reach to the world of Atzilut. And once it reaches that world of Atzilut, it has the potential to rise and be included in God's infinite light itself. So my mitzvah taps into the infinity of God's infinite light, which is amazing. And the person themselves, the soul themselves, has the potential to reach to the world that they come from, either Yetzirah or Beria. They go to those inner chambers of those worlds. So let's see. So there's Sefirot and there's the chambers. The Sephira is the light, the divine light that is connected to the spheres in the higher worlds. That's why my mitzvah, which connects to the spheres in one world, really raises up to the infinite light because they're all connected to God's sephiras. Whereas the chambers, my mitzvah has the potential to take my soul to the chambers, to the deeper chambers of the world that I come from. All right, let's share the screen and try to reread that. And let me see. I think I missed one question. No, so actually, Shira's asking if Moshe's world came from Tohu, and no, Moshe's world came from Tikkun, which is where all of our souls come from. Tikkun is the world of repair, and that's actually what Moshe was trying to do, bring Torah down into the world and bring it in a acceptable way. So that was from the world of Tikkun, which means more the normal, standard way. Okay, so let's turn the page now. But question is, could a soul rise to the highest of the 4 worlds, Atillus? The Tanya will now address this question. So just to explain the question, we know that our mitzvah, the divine light, could rise all the way up to the Atillus and higher. But what about the soul themselves? We said it reaches to the world of the chambers and the world of Bria or Yetzirah, but could our soul reach this high level, this high world? And as for the world of Atillus, which is beyond the mental capacity, grasp, and understanding of a created intellect, because the Blessed Infinite One's Chachma, Bina, and Das is utterly and perfectly merged with the light there in Atillus, with a merging which is more awesome and wondrous, with infinitely more dignity and more power than in the world of Beria. Atillus is not a world in the same sense as the other 3 worlds of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, which demonstrates some degree of separateness from God. The world Atillus is derived from the word Etzel, which means close, next to, or close. Therefore, Atillus is utterly and seamlessly merged with God's infinite light. Just going to pause there for a second. Oh, let me say one more paragraph first. And that's why Atillus is beyond the mental capacity, grasp, and understanding of a created intellect. For a thing to be comprehensible to the human mind, it has to have defining properties and finite boundaries. Since Atillus is next to the infinite light, it's also infinite, so the created intellect has no tools to grasp it. So let me just explain. I think this is a really cool idea. We're zoning in to the world of the word Atzilut. The word Atzilut, which is this world of emanation, but the word itself, what does it mean? Etzel, in Hebrew, Etzel means close to, next to. That's actually the word that is used to say when someone is close to someone else, I am next to them. So this world is called Etzel or Atzilut because it is close to God. It is merged with God. To give you by way of an example, when Moshe was close to dying, in the book of Numbers already, Moshe gave from his spirit onto 70 elders. And the word used when Moshe gave from his spirit, he brought them close to him. It says that Moshe leaned on them. He brought them close to them. And Vayetzal min haruach, and from his spirit, it was close to them. And then there's two of them that remained with that spirit that they were prophesying nonstop. It's a part of the story in the book of Numbers. You could come on Shabbos when we read that. It's in the portion of Behalotcha of the book of Numbers, and we could talk about that then. But the word over there is that Moshe was close to them. It was he gave from his spirit onto them. The word was Etzel. So similar to that is this world of Atzel or Atzilut is the world where the Sephirot, the light in that world, is fully merged with God. Whereas the other three worlds are more separate than God. Meaning, of course, they come from God and they acknowledge God and it's all godly light, but it still is a world. A world, by definition, means it's already going to be somewhat of a separated existence. They have their own character. It's like a child to a parent. A child knows who their parents are. A child has the same DNA of their parents, and the parents will do anything for their child, but at the end of the day, they're a separate entity. That's the Jew, the person, the way they are in the world of Bria. They come from God. There's a world that the Jew is in, whereas in the world of Atzilut, it's fully merged with God. So what we're asking over here is, could the Jew, through the performance of the mitzvah, with the proper kavanah, reach that soul, reach the world of Atzilut? And what we're starting to explain is the world of Atzilut is a world so merged with God that we can't understand what it's like, because we come from the world of Berea, which is already somewhat of a separate existence. So we have that everything has to have boundaries in our created beings, the way we understand it, the way we relate to it. Whereas Atzilut doesn't have that boundaries, it's fully merged with God. And Lynn, that's exactly right. There was Eldad and Medad. Cool that you knew that those were the two prophets that Moshe, out of the 70, they remained prophesying in the camp. Awesome. Let's pull that back up and see how he's explaining the difference between the world of Atzilut, which we can't grasp it because it's fully merged, it's close to God. But there in the world of Berea, the light has been downgraded so that it shines in a diminished, limited fashion, in order that created intellects can receive God's chachma, bina, and das, to know God and to understand and grasp something of that blessed infinite light within the intellectual capacity of the created minds, which are confined in capacity and limited in scope. So just to explain that point, since we are from the world of Bria, we are already limited. God can't give us an infinite intelligence of Torah, of himself. Because we are limited, we wouldn't be able to grasp something unlimited, something infinite. So God had to downgrade the light, which some of you are familiar with the term that we've had before of tzimtzum, which means a diminishment, in order to fit into our minds. In order for us to grasp God, it has to be something we could relate to. Just like any teacher, if their goal is just to show their student how smart the teacher is, they're going to teach things that go beyond the scope of what the student can understand, and the student leaves with nothing. The good teacher knows how to diminish his light, the teaching, in order that the student can grasp it. But the best type of teacher is able to diminish that light, that teaching, that the student could grasp it, but in that diminished light, it has all the seeds that the student, through understanding those seeds, can nurture it and actually understand the same depth that the teacher has. But didn't get lost in the teaching, he's able to actually eventually grasp that same level. In Hebrew, the Kabbalistic term we refer to it by Moses is that it takes 40 years for a student to truly grasp the teachings of their teacher. How many years were we in the desert? 40 years. Because it takes 40 years to truly grasp the teachings. But the point is that ultimately, the seeds were there originally that the student can nurture them, grow them, and have that teaching on the same depth. But if you try to give that depth originally, the student's not going to get anything. So it has to be within the framework of what the student is capable of receiving and eventually build on that. So over here also, the person, their soul, the source of their soul is from the world of Bria, which is a world, which means it's already bound, it has a boundary, it has a scope to it. So our created minds need to have the light of God within that capacity. So it has to be diminished to fit what we're able to understand, what we're able to receive. Whereas the world of Atzilut is beyond that. I know I'm sounding a little bit repetitive, but it's just these are Kabbalistic ideas, and I just want to make sure it's as clear as it could be. Okay. We're on the top paragraph of the Kindle, and I think we turned the page to 460. Yeah, I think we're on 460. Yeah, middle of 460 if you're looking in the book. So the diminishment of God's light in the world of Bria was necessary in order that the existence of separate created intellects should not become obliterated. And if instead of being obliterated, they would simply lose their separate identity through being reabsorbed back into their source, then they wouldn't be creations at all any longer. Rather, they would simply be reabsorbed in their source and root, in godliness itself. So, in the world of Bria, it's this diminishment which enables the Blessed Infinite One's Chachma, Bina, and Das to reach and illuminate these created separate souls. But that wouldn't happen in Atillus, which has relatively little diminishment. And it's impossible for created intellects to receive the light of God's undiminished intellect. And that is why we say that no thought of theirs, meaning of a person, can grasp him at all. So obviously this is not the answer, but it kind of explains the ultimate question of why do these things happen? Well, we can never understand it because we come from a place of Bria, which has a limited capacity of what we're able to understand, with a diminished light that allows us to understand it. But then there's the world of Atillus, which is a world that there's barely any diminishment of light. It's more relating to the infinite type of style of light that we don't have, we're not capable of understanding. But the point for here is, so the diminishment of light is actually the greatest favor God did for us, which allows us to understand it. Just like with the sun, it's a pretty common example that we get back to. If we love the sun and we say, you know what, I want the sun undiluted, without any protective layer around it, without any ozone layer, it's actually not a favor to us. We won't exist anymore. We'll be nothing. We'll be burnt. Or if you have a candle that you really want to save this candle, so you're going to block any air from getting in it, you're not doing a favor. You need the oxygen to come in. So we need that oxygen for us to live, and that oxygen is diminishment of light. If it's the undiluted light, we're not created beings anymore. We're not us. We're totally absorbed in the source, which is defeating the purpose. So when Moshe was in the cloud on top of Mount Sinai, would that be Atillus? It's a good question, because we actually touched on this in a previous class. We referred to the upper Gan Eden and the lower Gan Eden. We referred to the upper Gan Eden as the world of Bria. So that's not Atillus yet. That's lower than Atillus. It's still a more boundaried place. But I did tell you that the soul of Moshe comes from the world of Atillus, and that's why he was able to handle the concept of not eating for 40 days. Like, you speak to an average person, they're like, oh, that's not possible. And it's true, because they're speaking from the world of Bria, where we have to fit into a created mold. So we can't relate to Moshe, who was able to go 40 days without eating, which was in the world of Atillus, which he took on an entirely godly being for that time, an angelic being, which in fact, the Torah, some people are uncomfortable with this idea, but the Torah does refer to Moshe in the last portion of the Zota Bracha. The opening verse says, we're describing who Moshe was. He says he was an Ish Elokim. He was a godly man. So there was a part of him that was godly, meaning he came from the world of Atillus. So, Lynn, to answer your question, was he then at the world of Atillus? Probably. That's the source of where he was. I think so, but don't get mad at me if you find another source saying something else, but it does make sense based on what we're learning. And FYI from Shira, I read that Enoch and Moshe had souls from Tohu that descended into Tikkun. That's true. Moshe's descent into Tikkun helps us to repair. Awesome. Great. Yeah. But the way Moshe came into the world, he was already the world of Tikkun. Awesome. Cool. Let's continue. So, and you're welcome to ask questions on these ideas. What is a note coming up? Whoops. I think I think I lost the place, but I think I'm on the right place. Doesn't mean the soul can reach a level. I think we're on the bottom of the page here. Does that make sense to you guys? Yeah. So we're at the bottom of 460, or the bottom paragraph of the bottom line of the Kindle. Even though Atillus is beyond the mental capacity, grasp, and understanding of created intellect, that doesn't mean that no soul can reach that level. You just can't use ordinary intellect to get there. So now buckle your seatbelts. This is how we can have this outer being experience, because we just defined just how great Atillus is. So if I were to ask you, well, could we reach it? We're like, no, we're created beings. We can never reach a place that's beyond the created capacity without any boundaries. So what we're saying here is that doesn't mean you can't reach it. You just can't reach it through normal avenues of intellect, because that will only get you to the height of your intellect, which is still in Bria. So there is a way to get to Atillus, just not through normal means. Let's see how then. That's why for most souls, even Sadikim, the world of Atillus cannot be their home, and consequently, Atillus is only the repository of a few especially great Sadikim. How do great Sadikim reach a consciousness of Atillus? If, as we have explained, it's impossible for a created intellect to grasp. Because the worship of great Sadikim, which is the question we're asking now, how could you reach Atillus? So those great tzaddikim reach there because it is on a level that vastly transcends even the intellectually generated reverence and love, which comes from Bina and Das of God's greatness. Just as the world of Atillus vastly transcends the Bina and Das of any created intellect. The implication here is that great tzaddikim do not worship through Chachma and Bina, which is Bina and Das, which is cognition and recognition, but rather they worship God through the highest intellectual power of Chachma, inquiry. In fact, just as we learned that the 6 emotional spheres have their nest in Yetzirah, and the supernal mother, which is Bina, has her nest in the throne, which is Bria, we are also taught that the supernal father, Chachma, nests in Atillus. Wow. Chachma is not reachable. I'll come back to explain this paragraph. Chachma is not reachable by the mind. It's just beyond the grasp of our cognitive apparatus, and can only be appreciated with Chachma. Okay, so just to explain this mother-father business. To have a child, you have to have a mother and a father, and the father contributes the seed, and the mother develops that for 9 months, the incubation period for 9 months. For most of us, when we understand an idea, it has to go through Das, which is that development process, that incubation period. And only then could you be, now I understand. That's Das. It gives a skeleton to an idea. It gives a structure. That's most of us. You reach you have to understand something through bina, through the cognition of the idea. And then you're like, now I understand that that's the recognition of the idea. That's das. It makes it more yours. It makes it palatable. It makes it personable. It makes it understandable. There are those that they get the idea directly from the source, which is chachma. So we all have chachma. Chachma is the seed of the idea, the father, that lightning. Most of us have to then develop it into and elaborate it, analyze it, dissect it, which is das, the cognition of the idea. And then when it makes sense, it's the recognition. That's the mother, that's the womb, the development of the idea. Most of us need that development to have the idea make sense. But then there are those few great tzaddikim that they understand the idea directly from the source, from the seed of the chachma, which we have, but we don't get it yet. We needed to go through the process in order for it to make sense. There are a few great tzaddikim that they get it directly from chachma, from the source. And from that source, that chachma, they're able to have it in the Atillus, because it's talking about in the source. Let me just read that again, just to make sure those words fit in. I'm just going to share the screen and turn back a page, just to read that a little slower. The implication here is that the great tzaddikim, I'm on the second to bottom paragraph, do not worship through bina and das. Rather, they worship God through the highest intellectual power of chachma. And we know that chachma is nests in Atillus. And that's from the Mikdash Melech, which is a commentary on the Zohar from like hundreds of years ago. It's a really deep sefer, a book. And he says over there that Atillus is related to chachma, which is that seed of the idea. So those great tzaddikim are nest in Atillus, which is where chachma comes from. Wow. All right. Deep stuff. How is everyone doing? Let's just pause there for a moment. Are you guys hanging on?
So this goes back to my question that I asked you after class about those flashes of insight that we have. And
do you mind sharing it for everyone? Because that was a beautiful question that you and Nancy were discussing. But let me hear. I think you were discussing that with Nancy, right? Is that what?
Right. Right. We were actually having our after class party talk. So we had a great time. I can't remember exactly the question, but it just seemed to me that sometimes you have these flashes of insight. You don't know where they come from. You can see, you can see a whole idea, a whole thing just blown out immediately, and you don't know where that comes from. And maybe you haven't even been thinking about anything, and it just comes to you, that light. And then I was reading in Isaiah where Isaiah is talking about God's ways are higher than our ways, and we can't know them, but somehow we've received something in this flash. So I was wondering if that is what you were talking about when there's knowledge or wisdom or understanding outside ourselves. We don't know where it came from, and maybe that's where innovation or creativity or even discovery comes from. So that was my question.
So I think so, and I wasn't sure how to answer it because it's such a deep question, and it speaks to so much of us that sometimes we have these ideas that we don't even know where it came from. And the way I could relate to it is that's why there's a certain trust that we have in certain people that could tell us, guide us, mentor us, like a Rebbe, where no one else would tell us that we would listen to that. But somehow you look into their eyes and you're like, no, this person has a higher source that he's tapping into my source and telling me where I could reach. It's almost because he's on the world of Atillus. He's nests there, so he's able to see something that I don't see in myself. So sometimes we're privy to that ourselves. And I think it's coming from that flash of chachma, from the world of Atillus, that our soul is connected with. It's just, I will have to finish more of the chapter to see, do those things come maybe after doing a mitzvah with kavanah, or could those things come on an ordinary Tuesday, or after I'm coming back from a Super Bowl party, or is it coming after a holy experience that my soul is more in tune to that? I don't know yet, but I do think we have those flashes. I would say yes. If anyone disagrees or agrees, I would love to hear. But yeah, I would tend to agree with you on that, Lynn. Okay. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And I appreciate the question, and I'm glad you actually brought it up to everyone. Because I mentioned before, and I'll mention again, it's a very deep idea. I'm not expecting to grasp all of it, but it's nice to even be introduced to these, deep ideas that are, so Kabbalistic, but yet so practical, that through my mitzvah of kavanah, I have somewhat of a tap into this level. So I think the screen is shared, I think. But we explained, I think we're up to this. Okay, we're on the top of the Kindle page, and also we're on the middle of 461 now, I think, in the book, if you're looking. Above, we explained that rational intellect, which is Bina and Das, can bring you to Bria. So we just explained this a paragraph ago, that most of us have to go through the incubation, which is Bina and Das, the cognition of the idea, the analysis of the idea, elaborating the idea, and the personalization of the idea, which is Das, the recognition of it. That brings you to a place of Bria, the world of creation. That's where intellect comes from, because the intellect is objective and gets you out of yourself. Emotions, we learned, are personal and biased, whereas the intellect can be transpersonal and objective. So that is true to an extent. It's true that the subject which you are studying is transpersonal. It's something beyond and external to you, but the tools of intellectual processing with which you grasp the subject is very much personal. Those tools determine how you digest an idea which has come your way. So it turns out that the experience of Bria, which is a rational intellect, is a partial transcendence of self and not a full one. The external subject material gets you out of yourself, but the tools of analysis draws you back into your ego. To completely transcend yourself, you need to access your power of chachma. So I'm going a little fast, but just to explain that idea, I think it's a really cool idea. When you understand, you could understand something outside of yourself. You could understand something you disagree with. It's outside of you. You could still fully understand it. And it could transcend you to a place that I didn't know my intellect could get there. But wherever it takes you, I still have to use my tools that God gave me of how to understand it. So I'm still using my tools. So even though the intellect is not, it's out of you, so it could take you to a higher place, but the tools you use to understand it is very much personalized to you. So it's still biased of how you understand it. So in general, emotions are more biased, more personal, because it's my feelings. Intellect is out of me, so it could be more transcendental. But the tools you use to understand that intellect has to be part of you. So that's why you reach to the height of Bria. But now you are able to reach to the place of Atillus, which completely transcends you. How do you get there? Through tapping into your power of chachma. So there's three intellectual faculties or cognitive faculties: chachma, bina, and das, which is the acronym of Chabad. Bina and das is something we relate to more. Like all of us need to go through the womb of the mother to be born. It develops the fetus. It develops the idea. That's how we relate to an idea. That's how we agree with an idea. It goes through our bina processing, and then our das, which is the personalized. I get it. I believe in it. I want it. That develops the feelings. It has to go through das. So those are tools that are mine. But then you could transcend even that. That's through chachma. Chachma is the inquiry of an idea that is not even using my tools yet. So great Sadikim are able to relate to God using that chachma, and therefore it's nestled in the world of Atillus, because it's not structured around their being. They're able to rise above it. I don't know if it's a deep idea. We'll go further. I'm just going to take a question that came in. It's important to have emotion and feeling through, though, the way we understand things. First, practicing with Soli Chachma. Yeah. Okay, let's go further. Thank you for writing that. I'm towards the bottom. I'm just going to read the last line again because it was an important one. And if you're looking in the book, it's the top. We just turned the page on to 462. It's a deep idea, and we'll try to take it slow. To completely transcend yourself. So me and you, we all are looking for that transcendence. It's a big word. How do you transcend yourself? You need to access your power of chachma. So on one hand, it's good news because you already have the chachma. On the other hand, it's bad news because it's not easy to access that chachma. If you do, that's awesome, but let's see how. So you could have a transcendence experience, but how do you do that? So you know what, I'm going to pause for another second. There's a practical lesson. I'm hoping it's going to help. It's on the page 462. So hopefully this will give us a little bit of an intro to what we're about to say. I'm going to go slow because this is very deep ideas. And I pray for all of us that we should have that transcendent experience coming in this kosher way of chachma, which is awesome, to really relate to God in a way that you never thought you could relate to. And again, it comes through a practical mitzvah with deep kavana. But let's see how it works. You only transcend yourself completely when you rise above the tendency to process everything cognitively and can remain in a state of wonder and mental openness. So I love that word. If you have that mental openness, which is the word he's using now for chachma, if you remain in that state of chachma without it right away going through the process of bina, which is trying to understand it and analyze it, if you're able to remain in that mental openness, that chachma state, you could reach a state of transcendence, which is the world of Atillus, the world of emanation, which is part of God's divine light. Like we said before, it's close to God, it's merged with God, and therefore you could take your soul to the place of the infinity. So let me just go back to that idea. The point is, we know that the mitzvah reaches Atillus and beyond, because it's connected to the divine light, which is the sphere. But what about my soul, which is in the chamber of either Yetzira or Bria? So we know you could get to the height of that world through your mitzvah, but what about higher? So we're saying now, well, higher is Atillus. Atillus is directly connected with God himself. You can't reach above yourself because you go through the tools of Bina and Das to understand an idea. So therefore you can't get beyond that. But if you can let go of those tools that you naturally use and just go directly to the Chachma, which is what Sadikim do, the great righteous ones, then you are able to be in that state of transcendence of Atillus. That's the point. We're on 462, where there isn't the text of the Tanya much on this page. It's actually just trying to explain the theme of the Tanya over here. So there isn't, I mean, there is writing in the book, but it's not the actual text. It's just the author of this translation explaining the point of the Tanya here. So we are on the Kindle, it's toward the bottom with the paragraph that starts normally, and on the book it's on 462 at the top. Normally, your Chachma and Bina work together in your mind, doing opposite jobs. Chachma collects information from the outside, and Bina processes it on the inside. So Chachma gathers the information, and Bina processes it for you. To do that, Chachma needs to be in a state of wonderment, openness, and humility. It needs to be detached from yourself, because if you were constantly preoccupied with what ideas and events meant to you, you'd be a bad listener. You would never hear what another person is really saying, because 100% of your attention would be on noting your own reaction. Oh, this is so good. So for Chachma to do its job and receive wisdom from the outside, it must be totally detached from self and focused entirely on the other. This is so cool. I love how he explains this. If you, Robert, I just want to make sure I understand this myself. When you talk to someone and you're like, oh, how will I respond to this? You're not really listening to them. You're thinking of how you're processing it and how you're going to respond back. To truly listen, you have to be somewhat humble, because you're not thinking of yourself or your response and what you're going to do with this information. But like a lot of times you're like, "Ooh, this is good. I want to make sure I repeat this back to my wife because this will help us." Or you're not fully being humble to the experience. Like sometimes I'm a big note taker. I love taking notes. It's the way I'm able to fully listen. But already as you're taking notes, you're somewhat processing it your way. You're not fully humble to the speaker. I'm a big note taker, so I'm a big fan of it. But there has to be 10% of you that is humble to the idea, that you're not taking it word for word. That way you're just going to repeat it back. You're going to just soak it in. Be humble to the idea. Allow your chachma, which is your openness, to be fully present to that person. I find this to be, so that's how he explains chachma versus bina. Bina is processing it on the inside. Chachma is collecting information from the outside. You need to have both. You can't have one without the other. But usually our more dominant one is bina. It's how we relate to it, how we process it. But chachma needs to be open at least some of the time in order to fully be there to be the listener. Yeah, Robin, sorry. Yeah.
Can we say that our chokmah is infinite, yet our bina and das are not?
So our chachma is not infinite, but it is related to God's infinite. So chachma is the beginning in Kabbalah. Chachma is the first process, how God creates the world. And therefore we mirror that. So chachma is our highest capacity. When we talk about the essence of the soul, we're talking about the power of chachma of the soul. Chachma is in general, there's 10 sefirot. Some of you are familiar with this idea, especially if you've taken classes with Rabbi Rice. He's a Kabbalah expert. So Barbara and Mrs. Berger, I'm sure you are familiar with these ideas. That there's 10 soul powers that we have. 7 are emotional, but they are developed from 3 cognitive, 3 intellectual ones. The highest of them being chachma. So in short, chachma leads to bina, which leads to das. And once you have das, which means you personalize that idea, you could then get excited about it, or you could then get scared about it, or you could then get angry about it, or you could then get in love about it, about the person. All those are the emotions that come from the intellectual faculty. The highest of those intellectual faculties is chachma. So the chachma of the soul is the highest root where all the rest come from. So chachma in general is the highest of our created beings to reach. But once you're tapped into that chachma, you're then privy to a whole, you open the window to what's above chachma. Does that make sense? So meaning chachma is the highest faculty that we could reach. But once you reach that state of chachma, that openness, that humility, you then open up a window to what's above chachma. So which is above myself. That's what we're talking about now in the world of Atillus. How beautiful it is to remain in a state of wonder and mental openness. It is amazing. Awesome. Yeah, cool. Yes, Lynn. Oh, I'm sorry, you're muted. Yeah, go.
So part of it is cultural. We're always looking for the facts, the data, the information. We're in such an information age, and that's how we learn, and that's how we perceive truth today. Is it factual? Things that aren't factual, maybe we don't trust as much. So we're kind of going against a cultural norm. I'm an instructor at a local college, and so as you're speaking, I see this as preparing a paper or report. You have to do the data gathering before you can have the great thoughts. You have to have enough. So I'm starting backwards and saying, what are the things you're curious or excited about, or you have wonder about? And let's talk about that. And then from there, we'll develop, a paper. What is a thought that's so exciting you want to dig in and find more? So is that kind of what you're talking about? Is because it just seems like we're so data driven. That's how we think today. Can you share?
So Lynn, first of all, it's so cool that you instructed how you teach your students. That's so cool to start with that curiosity and openness. If I were to put chachma into one word, chachma means wisdom. I'm actually going to translate it as humility, but also as faith. In order to have faith, you have to allow yourself to go above what you feel is the data, the analysis. And of course, in world, we live off that and it's important. But that's, I think, why there's so many people that lack faith, because it's not something I can understand. It can't be true. It's not factual. I can't see it. I can't dissect it. So that's where Chachma comes in, where it gives you the window to God. In Hebrew, there's a lot of words that we use for creation of world. A very common one is ein. We are a yesh, which means we are in existence, and we come from a place of ayin, which means we don't know what it is. It's nothing. That nothing is referring to Chachma. Chachma is how we are created from God's Chachma. That's where He's able to develop an existence. But anything, it's referred to as nothing because it's something we can't describe like we can in your class, like describe other things. So I love the idea that you're saying that Bina and Das is the data. Bina is more the data-driven information, the analysis and the statistics. And from there, we come to our determination, which is Das, the recognition. But you have to realize there's something above it. And when you block out that Chachma, you're blocking out your humility to believe in something beyond that data, or that which I'm translating now as faith, which is what Chachma is. So a big part of Tanya, it's so cool because Chabad starts with the Chachma. It's like the premise of our entire relationship with God has to be on Chachma, has to be on faith. Then you can't satisfy yourself with that. You have to go to the depth of the Torah and understanding of the Torah and the intelligence beyond it. But it starts with the humility. And then you could go to the data. That's a great, and Ein Sof Hashem. Awesome. Yeah. Great stuff. Thank you for bringing that up. And it's such lofty ideas. So to really try to bring it out. And I think that the author of this chapter in the English is doing a really good job in bringing it out with, the Chachma is what's outside of you, collecting information. And Bina is more processing the information. And you have to have the Chachma open to be able to listen, to be a real listener. I think that's a really, really powerful idea. Lynn, did you have another question? Oh, no. Oh, sorry. No. Okay. Chachma. So we're on. Sorry, I did not share the screen yet. 462 in the book, towards the top. And I think that I'm sorry. I don't think I turned the page out here. Has to receive wisdom, it must be totally detached from self and focus entirely on the other. Chachma then feeds the tools of Bina and Das, which process the raw information, analyzing it precisely to work out what the idea means to you. But imagine what would happen if you get stuck, so to speak, in Chachma, never progressing to the question, what does this mean to you, to me? You'd be in a state of amazement and wonder at the universe. You'd lose your rigid sense of self and see your role as a force put here for a greater cause. Wow. Most of your fears would drop away because loss and misfortune are all bound up with your fragmented self-concept. Your thought about God wouldn't be, what can God do for me? But rather, I am nothing but the power of God within me. While you can't really know what Atillus is like until you get there, the Tanya gives us one simple guidepost here. It's about transcending Bina and Das and reaching a consciousness of Chachma. Okay, so just to explain this idea, when we take in the beauty of the world, we're always soaking it in how we could appreciate it. And therefore, there's also, whether it's fear or something driven behind it because it's personalizing it to me. But if you could take that out of what it means to me and just take in the greatness of God's world or the greatness of God on its own, you see yourself as nothing other than the tool or the power of God within me. I love the way he worded that. So, and like we just said in the last paragraph, we don't really get Atillus until we're there. So what does it mean to totally linger on Chachma and not allow Bina and Das to take over? But in short, what it is, it's about transcending Bina and just reaching a state of Chachma, a state of mental openness. Wow. Just be in that state of wonder without taking it to the next, getting it into the next gear right away. That's like living a state of Atillus for that moment. Cool. Rather, the worship of these souls of Atillus, which souls are we talking about? The souls of the great few righteous right? I'm throwing in there like the soul of Moses, although he didn't say that yet, is on the level of an actual chariot to the blessed infinite one, so that their separate identity is lost in his, and they are absorbed in God's light. So I'm sorry for switching it again, but we had this many chapters ago, in chapter 18, I think, where we're talking about the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, being like a chariot to God. A chariot is so humble, it doesn't decide what direction it's going to turn. It's totally at the whim of wherever the driver wants to take it. That's what a chariot is. The patriarchs were so in sync with God that they were at a chachma state of openness, that it wasn't about their way of processing it. It was totally, what does God want from me? What am I needed for at this moment? So therefore, yeah, even a state of Akedah, the binding of Isaac, which is so atrocious to imagine, but in Avram's mind, that's what God needed from him at that moment. It wasn't even a question. He was a full chariot, humbled to the will of God. And throughout life, that's exactly what Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, it was always about that moment of being in a state of chariot. So that's what Atillus is, being a chariot to God. And their separate identity is lost. Okay. We're at the bottom line of the Kindle, and also towards the bottom of the 462. As we have learned above, the sages compared the totally transpersonal state of chariot, which doesn't follow its own personal concerns and is driven by something outside it, in this case, the awareness of God through Chachma. The mind state of chariot, which is like Chachma over here, Atillus, is the result of reaching the consciousness of Atillus. That's from the previous Rebbe from 1940, where he explains that. And this energy of Atillus will influence both them and everything that is theirs. It will touch all of the great tzaddiks' relationships and possessions through the observance of Torah and mitzvahs. Such Sadikim resemble what the sages said, that the patriarchs were genuinely a chariot to God. That's from the Midrash. Because all of their days, the patriarchs worshipped on such a level, and like see above, like I told you before, we learned it in chapter 18. While this may seem beyond the reach of ordinary people, the Tanya suggests that such a consciousness is attainable by us at certain auspicious times. So buckle up. This, we're saying now, is the level of a tzaddik, the level of the patriarchs, to be a chariot in sync with the world of Atillus through the awareness of Chachma, that openness. But how does this relate to us? But if your soul root is underpowered for such a perfect level of worship of Atillus, to consistently shed your self identity and become absorbed in God's light through worship, you might only achieve it occasionally at certain times, which are an auspicious moment above. Let's see what that is. The Tanya gives an example of an auspicious moment when the energy of Atillus is more accessible to us than usual, such as during the Amida prayer, which has the consciousness of Atillus from the Priyetz Chaim, especially during the bows, during the Amida, since all bowing is an expression of transpersonal energy of Atillus, as stated in Priyetz Chaim in his commentary on Welcoming Shabbos, because the theme of bowing is the dissolving of your identity in God's light, to be considered zero in his presence, literally. Awesome. So even though we may seem that this state of consciousness is unattainable, there are auspicious times when me and you, the average Joe and the average Jew, is able to attain it. When is that? During this time of Amida. Every day we get to pray the Amida. It's the same words we said yesterday, but you should know that at that moment, you're in a state of humbleness in front of God, in front of the King. That's why we have our feet together like an angel, and there's no talking. It's a quiet, solemn moment. But then, especially during the time of the bows, there's 4 bows we do during the Amida. At the first blessing, at the second blessing, we bend our knee and then our head, and also by the modim, and then by the last, second to last blessing, 4 times we bow during the Amida. That is the state of humility that we are in, which is that state of Chachma. So during that moment of the bow, just to realize, just to have that awareness that that's my access point to Atillus. So that's what the patriarchs lived with day in and day out. They were that chariot. I don't feel that when I'm at work, because I need to use my data-driven mind and I need to personalize the idea. But during the Amida, you're in that state of transcendence. During that Amida, you're able to tap into that world of Atillus through Chachma, which is your power of humility and openness, mental openness. So during the Amida, you're in a state of mental openness. When you bow, it's that humble feeling that you are touching into Atillus. Cool stuff. Thank you, Alter Rebbe, for giving us this gift to know this. All right, the final paragraph for the day. But ultimately, since such a soul only reaches the level of Atillus occasionally, its primary soul location is in the world of Bria. For only occasionally, at an auspicious moment, will the soul rise to Atillus, at special moments of personal inspiration known as feminine waters. In Hebrew, that's called Mayin Nukvin, as is known to those well-versed in Kabbalistic esoteric wisdom. A soul of Bria, which worships God with intellectually generated love and reverence, the ideal advised in the Tanya can still, which is what we're talking about now, can still reach Atillus consciousness from time to time, a level experienced consistently only by great Sadikim. I have to tell you that chapter 39 has always been a struggle. It's a deep chapter. It's my first time learning it with this translation of Rabbi Chaim Miller, and I find it to be, even though it's still very deep, but it's lofty levels, but I do feel I'm able to understand it better than I ever did. And I really hope that you're also able to understand it using this. So you could call me if there's a part of it that you're not so certain. I can't promise I'll know the answer because it's deep ideas, but just the theme of the day is that our main soul location is Bria, which is the soul, the world of intelligence, which is using my Bina and Das processing, which personalizes the idea. But you should know that there is a part of you that could, even though my mitzvah has that light which can reach the place of Atillus, don't underestimate the power of your soul from reaching there also. You could have a state of transcendence higher than the source of your soul location. My soul location is in Bria or Yetzirah, but through tapping into the Chachma that God gifted you, that's tapping into the infinity. And when you tap into that Chachma, you're able to then reach the world of Atzilut, which are usually only designated for certain souls of righteous to reach. How do you reach into that state of Atzilut? Using your Chachma is being like a Chachma. Chachma is that state of openness, inquiry, that's not about how am I taking the idea. It's not about myself making a bias, which is not a bad thing. It's using the tools that God gave you. Chachma means being open, being a listener, being in a state of Amida, which is totally in front of the king, humbled to what's greater. Not, and what am I going to do with it? Once you're already at that, what am I going to do with it? You're in the world of Bria. It's about me. But if you're able to remain above that, that's the state of Chachma. All right, with that, we will conclude the class. Thank you all. Have a great end to your week. And I'm looking forward already to next week.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
You're
Thank you.
Have a good-
Amazing, amazing.
Awesome. I'm so glad, Barbara. Thank you for enjoying. All right, thank you.